This is History Unit 2, Lesson 11, Reading and Annotating a Chapter about the Vietnam Conflict. So what students are going to do in this lesson is they're going to read a chapter from Gerald Dancer's The Americans. This chapter is on the Vietnam Conflict, and they have several purposes for reading. There are those essential questions that they're going to be reading the text for to see if they can find some information that would be useful to help them answer those questions. They're going to be reading with the timeline in mind because in the last lesson they made some inferences and asked some questions about the timeline, and they are to read the chapter to see if their inferences might be supported and their questions answered. They are going to be looking at the chapter in terms of the Vietnam conflict, social, political, religious, etc. interpretations about the conflict. And they're going to be taking a look at some of the controversies that exist about the conflict. And some of those will be clear in the relationship between the text and the timeline because there will be a couple of different interpretations. In Activity 1, students are going to preview the chapter and learn about Gerald Dancer, the author, in order to think about the kinds of information that they're going to be reading. What you need to know is that the chapter includes some personal stories from those who were there at the time of the Vietnam conflict. It also includes maps, pictures, and newspaper headings, those kinds of things that make history come alive. Well, because it has those things, this provides an opportunity for a discussion about the trustworthiness of those kinds of documents. For instance, is a photograph a trustworthy piece of information that historians might want to use? What do they have to be thinking about if they're looking at a photograph in terms of its trustworthiness? This also provides opportunities to discuss the relationship of those elements, the maps, pictures, newspaper headings, personal stories, etc., to the main body of the text. Are they there to add information, corroborate it? What kinds of things are they doing? So this is a good discussion to have with students. It gets them to be critical readers of their textbooks. In Activity 2, they're actually preparing to read the documents, and you want them to think about the strategies they're going to be using. They're going to be using G-Sprite, which they have used before. They're going to be using annotation, as they have done before, and they're going to review the purposes for reading, which we've already mentioned. What you need to know is that this is a long chapter. Actually, it's the first that students will be reading that is a full-length chapter. It's got 4 sections, and that is explained in the teacher's guide. So you're going to have to decide how you want to structure the readings. You could read in 4 different sittings. You could divide the sections among students and then have them share the the information they learned when reading the sections. There are different things you're going to have to take into account, and I would actually involve students in this discussion. So students are going to be reading and annotating the chapter, and they're going to be completing a G-Sprite graphic organizer as they read. Before they start to read, you might want to address the length of the chapter and the necessity for working on their reading stamina. This is really an important element to success as college students because they're going to have to be reading multiple long involved chapters every week if they're going to be taking an introductory history course. So it's important for them to work on this now, and you can use this as a motivating factor to keep them working. Also, you can ask students before they start to read for their input in structuring the reading assignment. How do they want to do it? Do they want to read 2 sections at a time, 1 section at a time, etc.? So after they've read, there is a debriefing for each section that is in the teacher's guide, and I recommend that you read that ahead of time. The students are going to engage in whole group discussion after each section, and they're going to address the teacher's questions. Now those debriefing questions begin on page 201 of the teacher's guide. They should help students think critically about the information they read. So as I said before, it's important to read those first. And because they're long, you might want if you're short on time, you can pick the most important ones. And of course, because you're beginning the discussion in an open-ended way, it may be that they are already noticing and addressing some of the things that you would have been asking them as follow-up questions, so that you do not have to ask them everything if they've already discussed it. So some of the questions require more reading and comparison contrast of the text and the timeline, and these might be the most important questions to address. In Activity 5, they're looking at vocabulary. Students are asked to talk through the discipline-specific words, or talk through something that they have done previously, and to discuss difficult general academic vocabulary. There's a section with some possibilities in the teacher's guide. In Activity 6, they're going to be returning to the timeline. When they do this, they're going to add new information or different interpretations to the timeline based upon what they read. Students at this activity can remove, change, or add information based upon their reading. And you don't want them to add so much detail that it takes forever to get it finished. So to make this a doable activity, you should discuss the notion that only the most significant items should be added. And then that gives you a good opportunity to discuss the idea of significance as a historical concept with students. That is, something is significant if it impacts multiple factors, has long-lasting or multiple effects, etc. And you might even talk about 3 different facts and how significant they are, or model the activity for students if they're having difficulty. In Activity 7, you're asking them to return to the essential questions. There is a graphic organizer where they can record relevant information and answering the essential questions that will be in their student academic notebook. Now, they're going to be using this graphic organizer in Lesson 13, the final lesson, because in that lesson they are going to be writing an essay addressing answers to the essential questions. So this is an important activity for them to do. It will help them later on. An alternative activity, if students are tired of writing in the graphic organizers, is to use highlighters. For instance, there are 3 essential questions for this unit. You could have them use 3 different colors, go back into the text and highlight the text information that helps to answer the questions. That's just a different way of doing something similar. And that's the end of the activities for this lesson, and I wish you luck in helping students learn from the textbook chapter.